Hi, I'm Althea. I used to think being the dependable one, the quiet one, meant they'd see me someday. But when my grandmother passed, my parents gave everything to my sister. Then they tried to sue me for what she'd left to me in her will. They said I manipulated her, that I was unstable, that I didn't deserve it. Funny how the only person who ever saw me clearly was the one they left to die alone, and the one I stayed for. They erased me from photos, cropped me out of stories. But now they want what I have? Isn't it strange how family rewrites the truth when it no longer fits their version of you? And the worst part? They almost got away with it. Almost. End with a pause. Let that last word echo. They didn't forget me. They just deleted me. The thought lingered as I stood in the upstairs hallway of my parents' home, staring at the framed photo from last year's Thanksgiving. Corinne stood in the center, one arm around Mom, the other lifting a wine glass. My spot, where I clearly remembered standing that day, was cropped out. Not blurred, not shadowed. Cropped. Like I had never been there. I could still smell the pot roast reheated too many times and hear the muffled clinking of silverware downstairs. No one had asked me if I wanted a plate. That wasn't new. I'd eaten gas station sandwiches in parking lots that tasted less like loneliness than that house. They always said it wasn't personal. Don't take it the wrong way, Mom told me once when Corinne was invited to speak at church and I wasn't even mentioned. You're just not the presentable one. Whatever that meant, it stuck. Downstairs, the memorial continued. Someone was retelling a story about Grandma Della making homemade jam. I could hear Corinne laughing, too loud, like she was playing to a crowd. Maybe she was. She always had a knack for sounding generous, while making sure everyone knew just how much she'd done. I took a slow breath and stepped into the kitchen for water. The dishwasher was humming. I reached for a glass, but Corinne's husband beat me to it. "Oh, Althea, you're still here?" he asked, surprised. "Yep," I said, filling the glass and walking away before I said something I'd regret. Later, during the slideshow, I stood in the back corner. One by one, the images played. Grandma in her garden, Corinne helping her blow out birthday candles, Mom and Dad sitting beside her hospital bed. And then, nothing. Nothing of me. I blinked, certain it was just the order. Surely they hadn't finished the montage yet. But it kept going. Corinne with her high school diploma, Corinne at prom, Corinne helping Grandma at the senior center event. Not a single frame with me. Not even the photo I took at Christmas when Della had worn the ridiculous red hat I crocheted for her. I stared at the screen, willing it to flash back to me. It never did. The worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was being erased. That night, after most guests had left, I sat on the edge of the guest bed. I'd folded the thin blanket down like I was staying in a stranger's Airbnb, not the house where I'd spent half my childhood. I opened Instagram. Corinne had already posted, "Family is everything. Miss you every day, Grandma." The photo showed her, Mom and Dad at the gravesite, the same one I had been standing in, right beside Corinne, just hours earlier. Only in her post, I wasn't there. She had cropped me out, again. The caption read, "Just us and the ones who truly mattered." I didn't comment. I didn't message her. Instead, I stared at the screen until the battery dropped to 1%, then powered it off. There was nothing to say. They didn't forget me. They just deleted me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay still in the stiff guest bed, the kind with sheets that feel more decorative than lived in. The kind that say, "You're only staying until you fix whatever made you show up." Downstairs had gone quiet, but the silence didn't feel restful. It felt performative, like a house holding its breath after politely dismissing a guest. I heard Corinne's laugh echoing in my head long after she'd gone home. That polished, practiced laugh. I wondered if she ever used her real one anymore. The phone was still off. I didn't need another version of the truth spun by filters and captioned with half-hearted grief. I sat up, swung my feet over the side of the bed, and pulled the leather satchel from beneath the nightstand. It was worn but reliable, soft at the corners from years of overuse. I unbuckled the clasp and reached for the envelope I had tucked deep inside. No return address, no sender name, just thick, weighty paper and a postmark from 2 weeks ago. I stared at it for a moment longer, then slid my finger under the flap and peeled it open. Inside was a single-page letter, typed neatly, with a name signed in blue ink at the bottom, E.M. She was Della's nurse. The letter said so. "She never stopped talking about you," it began. "She called you her only witness. She made me promise to send this after she was gone. I was her nurse. I saw. I remember." Attached to the back was a photocopy of a note, handwritten, shaky, but familiar. Althea stayed, not because she had to, because she chose me. The kind of sentence that doesn't just validate your past, it recenters it, like someone flipping on a porch light you didn't know was still wired. I let the paper rest in my lap, my fingers tracing the indentation of each word. The room, suddenly, felt smaller. There were photos on the dresser, not ones I had ever seen displayed in the house before. These must have been pulled from albums and dusted off for the memorial. Most featured Corinne. Her birthday at 5, dressed like a pageant queen. Her graduation. Her moving into her dorm. Our mother always beside her, hand on her shoulder, looking like she belonged in a magazine spread for proud American mothers. I searched the frames for me. When I did appear, it was background, obscured, turned away, holding someone's bag, or standing just outside the shot. You get used to being in the corners of other people's stories, but that letter, it was mine, centered, clear, named. I didn't cry, not because it didn't mean something, but because there was nothing left to drain. I'd spent years mourning a relationship I was never allowed to fully have. I folded the letter back into the envelope, returned it to the satchel, and zipped it shut. Standing, I walked over to the window and cracked it open. The air outside was crisp, smelled faintly of early spring and pine sap. I breathed it in slowly, like something sacred. Then I pulled my laptop from my bag and flipped it open. I stared at the blinking cursor for a few seconds, then typed 5 words into the search bar. Estate rights, Washington State. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was preparation, because love doesn't leave documents behind. But the truth? It usually does. By the time the sun climbed through the dusty blinds of the guest room, I'd already been up for hours. I'd watched the sky turn from gray to gold, listened to the house creak back to life, and sat in the stillness as if it could explain something to me. It didn't. I slipped into the bathroom before anyone else was up, washed my face in silence, and made sure my eyes looked steady. Not tired, not glassy. Just fine. I didn't need pity. I needed distance. Downstairs, the smell of reheated bacon and burnt toast hit me before I reached the bottom step. Velma was already at the stove in her robe, her hair brushed back neatly, like she always did for guests. Funny how I still felt like one. "Morning," she said, without turning around. She didn't ask how I slept. At the dining table, Corinne was seated in her usual spot, middle seat, middle of attention. Her plate was already full, like someone had made it for her. Probably Mom. I slid into the far end of the table, next to the wobbly chair that had always been mine. Dad sat to my right, reading the local paper like he couldn't hear a thing around him. Or maybe he just chose not to. Corinne reached for the butter, and without being asked, Dad passed it to her. "You want eggs?" Mom asked, only to Corinne. "I'm good, they're kinda greasy," she replied, wrinkling her nose. Mom smiled. "You always notice the details." I sipped my coffee slowly, trying to decide if the bitter aftertaste was the coffee or something deeper I wasn't ready to name. "So," Corinne began, her voice bright and casual, "we were talking last night, about the house, about everything." I glanced up. The we wasn't explained, but I knew what it meant. "We're just thinking through logistics," she continued, like this was a business meeting. "It's not about fairness or anything, it's just Practical, Dad grunted behind his newspaper. Then, almost too casually, he mumbled, "Not like you ever paid rent living in Grandma's house anyway." The fork in my hand paused midair. The silence at the table expanded like a slow leak in a tire. Quiet, but impossible to ignore. Corinne cleared her throat. "We all helped, Dad. Remember? I brought groceries that one time." "That one time," I repeated, softly, not looking up. No one responded. I let the moment pass, as if the silence might do the speaking for me. But it didn't. It never had. The thing about being useful in a family like mine is, if you don't narrate your own worth, they'll write you as background noise. Later, I stood at the sink rinsing my plate, thinking of a different sink in a different kitchen. One where I used to stand after giving Grandma her pills for the night. I would wash her dishes, fold her laundry, and make a grocery list for the week. Always alone. That memory pulled me back like muscle memory. I had learned to flush IVs before I learned how to file taxes. I knew which canned soups had less sodium, which cough syrup made her nauseous, and which nights her pain meant she couldn't sleep unless I sat beside her until morning. Corinne once texted, "Wine night, can't help. I still have the message." Funny how something that short can stretch forever in your mind. Back in the dining room, Corinne leaned over her coffee. "You know, it's not like you made some big sacrifice, Althea," she said lightly. "You didn't have a job, no rent, nothing tying you down. You stayed because you had nowhere else to go." Velma nodded, barely. Just enough to be seen. Dad said nothing. "You didn't give up anything," Corinne added. "You gained. Grandma gave you a place to crash when you couldn't figure your life out." My fingers tightened around my mug. I kept my eyes on the steam swirling up. In a different version of me, the one they preferred, maybe I'd lash out, maybe I'd cry. But in this one, I just breathed. "You rewrote me in your version of the story," I thought. "I just haven't edited mine yet." I stood up, rinsed my cup, and left the table without a word. That evening, upstairs again, I lay on the bed scrolling through my phone. Nothing much had changed, but when I tapped open the family group chat, family, all caps, it wasn't there. I closed the app, reopened it, still gone. I scrolled back through my texts. A system message popped up. "You were removed by the group admin." I didn't need to check who the admin was. I set the phone down on the nightstand, screen facing up, notification light off. No reply, no reaction. Because sometimes the loudest way to answer is to say nothing at all. The next morning passed slowly, dragging itself behind me like wet laundry. I didn't go downstairs. I didn't join them for breakfast. I knew what was coming. By noon, I was walking the sidewalk outside Marlon Vexley's office in downtown Spokane, every step tightening something in my back. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. The office hadn't changed. Same dusty blinds, half pulled in the windows. Same placard with his name in gold foil, chipping at the corners. The receptionist, Susan, still as stiff as ever, gave me a thin smile and nodded me in. Marlon stood as I entered. His handshake was brief, his expression unreadable. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon pledge and stale air. Corinne was already seated, sunglasses still on indoors, like she had something to hide. Mom followed behind me a minute later, all fake warmth and sorry for the delay smiles. We sat. Marlon cleared his throat. "Thanks for coming," he began, folding his hands over a manila folder. "Let's get right into it." He slid a crisp document from the folder and began reading aloud. "To my granddaughter, Althea Monroe, I leave my residence, my personal savings, and all household belongings." I didn't flinch. No mention of Corinne. No mention of splitting. No, to be shared by. No, as determined by future agreement. Just mine. Corinne stiffened. I watched her jaw twitch. Velma coughed lightly, then sipped her tea with exaggerated grace. The room shifted. Marlon continued. "Dated and notarized 6 months before Mrs. Della Maynard's passing. Signed, witnessed, and filed." He looked up. "Any questions?" Velma didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "We actually have a supplemental document," she said. "This was drafted closer to the end." Revision. Corinne chimed in. Grandma changed her mind. She wanted to be fair. "We were with her when she dictated it." Marlon raised a brow, but opened the envelope without comment. Inside was a second will, newer by date, only 3 weeks before Della died. This version divided everything equally between me and Corinne. "She regretted leaving Althea everything," Velma added. "She told us that." I said nothing. I didn't blink. Marlon looked through the pages, slower than usual. "This is unnotarized," he said carefully. "And it's not on the same stationery as her other legal documents." "She wasn't in a condition to go through the formal process," Mom answered quickly. "We just wanted her wishes recorded." I leaned forward gently. "And where exactly did she sign this?" Corinne avoided my eyes. "At home. She dictated. I wrote." I nodded. Marlon cleared his throat again. "If this is a claim of a revised will, it would need to be accompanied by witnesses, a medical clearance of mental capacity, or notarization to override a previously filed document." "It's still her words," Velma insisted, "and we expect it to be honored." I didn't argue. I picked up the second document myself. My fingers traced the date, 2 weeks before she passed. A quiet timestamp no one else seemed to notice. Except I did. Because I remembered exactly what the nurse had told me. The day Della stopped speaking, stopped eating. The day the hospice care record showed her unresponsive. That date was 5 days before this so-called revision. I sat back. "May I have a copy of that for my records?" I asked, my voice even. Marlon hesitated, then nodded. Velma narrowed her eyes slightly, but said nothing. Corinne fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, then said almost too casually, "We just want what's fair, Althea. It's not about taking anything away from you." "Of course not," I said. "It never is." Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling loose leaves across the sidewalk. I tucked the copied pages into my folder and stood. Velma rose too. "We're just trying to do right by her." I looked at her, really looked at her. "You're trying to rewrite what she already made clear." Then I left the room, not in a rush, not in anger, just with purpose. After leaving Marlon's office, I stopped at a corner cafe 2 blocks down. It was barely 4 p.m., but the sky had already dimmed, cloud cover moving in low and thick like a lid over the city. I sat by the window with a lukewarm chai latte I didn't finish, and the copy of the forged will sealed in an envelope inside my bag. I wasn't surprised they'd try something like this. I was just disappointed they'd been so sloppy. Back at my apartment, technically a short-term rental near the university, I turned on a desk lamp and slipped off my coat. I had a consulting call in the morning and a syllabus to finalize, but I couldn't bring myself to look at either. Instead, I laid the documents on the dining table, read through each line again, and stacked them neatly. Then came the knock. 3 short taps. A pause. Then one more. Not the kind of knock a neighbor uses. Not the rhythm of delivery. It had familiarity, intentionality. I froze, then moved slowly to the door. Through the peephole. Velma and Corinne. Of course. I opened the door only halfway. "Can we come in? Just for a few minutes?" Velma said, smiling like she was offering cookies, not chaos. "We have an idea." I stepped aside. Not because I wanted them in, but because I wanted this over with. Corinne walked in first, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She scanned the room like she expected me to live in clutter, then perched herself at the kitchen island. Velma followed more slowly, placing her handbag on the counter like she might be staying longer than planned. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't ask if they wanted to sit. Corinne was the first to speak. Of course she was. "Look, we've been thinking. This doesn't need to be a big deal," she said, tone measured, fake sweet. "We can handle this between us, quietly, Like family. I said nothing. She glanced at Velma, then continued. You've got the house now, the savings. All we're saying is, it might be better for everyone if it was shared. No courts, no depositions, no lawyers sniffing around Grandma's medical records. She paused, like she was giving me a moment to come to my senses. The court doesn't need to get involved, she added. We all know how these things can spiral. I lifted my tea, now cold, and took a small sip just for the pause. And what do you think fair looks like? I asked finally. Corinne brightened. 50-50, the property, the accounts, even split. No drama, Velma chimed in. It's not about the money, Althea. It's about dignity, keeping this within the family. Grandma would have wanted that. My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice even. That's funny. I thought she made her wishes very clear. In writing, filed, stamped, notarized. Velma leaned forward, palms flat on the counter. She was confused, sweetheart. You know how people get at the end. She was lucid enough to sign legal documents 6 months before she passed, I said. Corinne rolled her eyes. Come on, you think this is really worth dragging us through court over? It's not a good look. Velma softened her tone. I don't know what you're going through emotionally, but suing your own family, it raises eyebrows. People talk. At church, they're already asking questions. There it was. The real threat. Reputation, appearances, control through image. I leaned back against the counter, arms folded. I remember the last time someone told me to keep quiet for the sake of appearances. Grandma's medication got skipped that weekend. 2 days, Velma, because you couldn't handle the sight of her in a hospital gown. Silence. Velma's expression cracked, but only slightly. Corinne looked down at her phone like it had suddenly become urgent. I stepped away, opened the drawer next to the fridge, and pulled out a thick envelope, already sealed, addressed, and labeled with the name of my attorney. I placed it on the counter between us. You came here thinking I was scared. I'm not. I tapped the envelope. This is the full hospice log, dated, certified. It proves Grandma was unconscious when that second will was allegedly created. Velma blinked. Corinne's face went blank. I haven't filed it yet, I added, but I will. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just let the words hang there like a final period. Velma stood, adjusting her cardigan. You don't have to do this. No, I said, but I will if you keep pushing. Corinne looked up, eyes narrowed. You really think you're above us now, don't you? No, I said again. I just finally understand that keeping quiet never earned me anything but erasure. Velma's tone turned cold. You're making a mistake. I walked to the door, opened it wide. You should leave before I forget what being civil feels like. They didn't argue. They just walked out, Corinne first, Velma trailing behind like she thought I'd call her back. I didn't. After they left, I didn't sit down right away. I stood at the door for a minute longer, hand resting on the knob, feeling the air they'd displaced as if it might still carry weight. It didn't. The quiet came back just like it always does, unbothered, unbent. That night, I didn't eat much. I picked at a microwave meal, typed out 2 sentences of the syllabus draft, then closed my laptop. My head was too loud for logic and too focused for sleep. The next morning, I walked to the courthouse downtown. It was cool out, but dry. Spring-teasing Spokane with a false sense of early warmth. I had filed my hospice documentation 3 days earlier, and while it wasn't legally required to follow up, I wasn't interested in trusting anyone else's definition of due process. Inside, the civil clerk's desk looked exactly as it always had. Rows of folders, a woman typing too quickly on a keyboard too old. I gave my name, the case reference, and waited. She clicked, then clicked again. We don't have that file in the system yet, she said, eyes still on the screen. My fingers flexed slightly. I have the drop-off receipt, I told her, reaching into my folder. I unfolded the slip and laid it flat. Her eyes flicked down, then up. Must have gotten misrouted. Sometimes the internal mail. She paused, gave a half shrug. Just gets delayed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She took the receipt, stood, and disappeared into a back room. I waited 6 minutes. When she returned, she was holding my file. Found it, she said brightly. Looks like someone filed it under miscellaneous probate instead of active challenge. Totally routine. I nodded. Can I get a timestamp added for when it was first received? She hesitated. I can write a note for the judge. I'd appreciate that. I walked out without thanking her. That afternoon, I met Mira Lennox at a quiet coffee shop just outside campus. I'd messaged her earlier in the week, and she'd agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to meet. When she walked in, her hair was tied up in a messy bun, eyes darting around the cafe, like she expected someone else to be watching. She ordered black coffee, no cream, no sugar. I won't take much of your time, I said, once she sat. I just need a confirmation of the dates we discussed. Mira shifted in her seat. Look, I've been thinking. This whole thing, it's complicated. Her voice didn't sound uncertain. It sounded rehearsed. You were the one who told me she was nonverbal the last 2 weeks, I said carefully, that she hadn't held a pen in 5 days before passing. I don't know, she said. I don't want to be involved anymore. I didn't sign anything official, and I don't want to be dragged into court. Her hands were wrapped tightly around the coffee cup, knuckles pale. Someone talked to you, Mira? She didn't answer. I just want what's true on the record. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am, but I can't help you. She left a $5 bill on the table and walked out before I could say another word. Back at my apartment, I tried to return to my work, just enough to distract myself, but the echo of Mira's voice kept looping in my head. Not what she said, what she didn't. I shut the laptop and decided to stop by Marlon's office to pick up additional paperwork. He hadn't called me in, but I didn't care. I wanted to see something. The reception area was quiet when I arrived, the bell above the door giving a soft chime. Marlon was out, but his assistant said I could grab what I needed from the file basket on his desk. As I walked into his office, I froze halfway through the threshold. On the far wall, just behind his desk, was a framed photo. A family shot. My family. The same old group picture from Della's backyard. Summer barbecue, paper plates, plastic cups. I remembered standing just behind the table, next to Grandma. In the version on his wall, I wasn't in it. Cropping is an art, so is a mission. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before speaking. Did Marlon say where he got that? I asked the assistant as she passed by. She looked over. Oh, that one. Your mother brought it in last week. Said it was the last photo Della ever approved for public use. I smiled just a little. Right, public use. I took my file and left. That evening, I went into the drawer next to my desk and pulled out a different copy of the photo. The original. My arm was around Della's shoulder, her hand resting on mine. I folded it carefully, not out of anger, but preservation. I didn't need to display it. I just didn't want to forget that it existed. Let them crop, I murmured, slipping it back into the drawer. I'll carry the uncut version inside me. I opened my laptop. This time, I didn't hesitate. I uploaded the hospice logs, certified, attached the original date stamp, typed a short cover letter to my attorney, and hit send. Then I sat back, looked at the frame on my wall, the one I'd left empty. If they want a war of edits, I said aloud, I'll go original. 3 weeks passed. Fast in hours, slow in wait. The courthouse was cold that morning, not by temperature, but by design. Pale floors, gray walls, a faint hum in the vents that never went away. I arrived early, not to be prepared. I'd done that already, but because I refused to let them see me walk in late. Elena Ruiz, my attorney, met me outside the deposition room. She wore her confidence like a well-fitted jacket, her hair pinned up tight, one folder in hand, and a second tucked beneath her arm. You won't have to say much today, she said calmly. Let them unravel. I nodded. Words weren't my weapon today. Paper was. Inside, the room had 2 long tables, as expected. I took my seat across from Corinne, who was dressed for theater. Black blazer, pearls, hair blown out, not a single flaw out of place. She didn't look at me. Velma sat just behind her, lips pressed thin, hands clasped over a bag that didn't quite match her shoes. Subtle, but it told me she had packed this moment in a hurry. Across the aisle, their lawyer sat quietly, reviewing his notes. Marlon wasn't here. He'd referred out, citing a potential conflict of interest. That was one way of saying he'd finally realized what game they were playing. I didn't bring a briefcase, just a thin folder with exactly 4 items. Enough. The clerk swore us in, outlined the rules, and then asked if we had evidence to enter. Elena stood, offering a small USB drive. We'd like to begin by playing a short video submitted anonymously to our office last week. Corinne's face shifted slightly, but she didn't object. Velma tilted her head like she'd missed a key sentence. The judge nodded. The video began. It was grainy, vertical frame, clearly a live stream replay. Corinne sat in a kitchen, hers, probably, sipping from a glass of red wine. Laughing, talking to someone off-screen. I didn't really take care of Grandma, she said, waving a hand like it was all silly. But I had to say I did. People expect that, right? She sipped her wine again and laughed. The screen went dark. No one spoke. Velma's composure cracked just enough to show something underneath. Surprise, maybe. Disappointment, definitely. The family attorney closed his notebook and leaned back slightly, like he was doing the mental math on how much to bill for this hour. The judge looked at Corinne. Would you like to clarify anything from that clip? He asked. Corinne blinked twice. That was taken out of context. The judge didn't look convinced. I hadn't moved. He turned to me next. Ms. Monroe, any response before we move to the documents? I opened my folder slowly, deliberately, then pushed the contents across the table. Hospice logs, signed, time-stamped, and cross-checked with facility records. Medical bills, in my name. Not Velma's. Not Corinne's. The final notarized will, filed 6 months before Della died. And one photo, me sitting on the porch with Della. No editing, no cropping. Just her hand on mine, the kind of touch that didn't need explanation. I looked at the judge. I stayed, I said. Not because I didn't have options, but because no one else did. I said nothing more. He scanned the pages, took his time. Then he cleared his throat. These records are consistent, official, admissible, and they support your claim. He turned to the other side of the table. Unless you have additional legal documentation that meets or exceeds the standards presented, I will be issuing a final determination in Ms. Monroe's favor. The silence in the room shifted again. This time, it landed heavy on Corinne's side. She looked frozen, like she didn't know whether to argue or retreat. Velma stood. Not abruptly, not defiantly. She just stood, straightened her jacket, and said nothing. She didn't look at me as she walked out. The attorney followed her. Corinne lingered a beat longer. Then she looked at me. "Ma, I hope you're happy," she said flatly. "You've torn this family apart." I didn't answer, because the truth? They'd been tearing it apart for years. I just stopped letting them hide the evidence. Outside, the sky had cleared. Not bright, but clean. The kind of day that didn't demand joy, just offered stillness. I stepped onto the courthouse steps and exhaled. Not relief, not triumph, just breath, steady, full, clear. The morning after the hearing, I packed in silence. 1 suitcase, my laptop, a box with just enough books to remind me who I'd always been beneath the noise. The apartment was still under my name for another week, but I didn't want to sleep there again. Not after they stood in my doorway, not after the courtroom fell quiet, the moment their story collapsed under its own weight. I folded the key inside a plain envelope and left it at the front desk. No note, no forwarding address. Just my name, printed once, neatly. No one called, no one texted. It was better that way. I took the 10:45 a.m. bus out of Spokane. The ride to Walla Walla was uneventful, and I was grateful for it. I stared out the window as fields and fences blurred by, letting the quiet settle in places where memory had grown too loud. The new house wasn't much, yet. A one-story bungalow with peeling green paint and a porch swing that creaked even without weight on it. The backyard was wild with weeds, and the kitchen smelled faintly like old wood and forgotten grease. But it had good bones. It was enough. I spent the first week painting, muted sage for the kitchen, soft white for the living room. I replaced the porch swing with one from a local thrift store, sanded and repainted it myself. I cleaned windows, fixed the back gate, and patched a leak under the bathroom sink without needing anyone else's help. There was something sacred about doing things without being seen. When it was done, I printed out a small sign and taped it to the inside of the front door. "You matter here." It wasn't for me, not exactly. It was for the girls I hadn't met yet, the ones who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go, or the older woman whose kids stopped calling years ago, or the quiet soul with a duffel bag and a look in their eyes that said, "I don't know where else to be." I called it the hearth, a place to land, not a place to prove anything. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of tea, I opened my laptop. I hadn't posted online in months. Not really. I deleted most of my social media, not out of drama, but because I was tired of being misrepresented by squares and captions. But that night, I felt something shift. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't name names. I didn't mention the court case or the will or the family that left me out of their photos. I just wrote, "Sometimes they erase you, quietly, over time, until one day you realize the version of you they've kept is one they needed, not one that's real. But the thing is, you can start again. You can write new pages, one sentence at a time." Under the post, I attached the only photo I'd kept. Me and Grandma Della, hands touching, no filter, no edits. It wasn't a statement, it was an offering. I closed the laptop, brewed more tea, and went to bed early. I didn't think much about it. But the next morning, when I opened my inbox, I had over 200 unread messages. People had shared the post, reposted it, written their own stories in the comments. This was my aunt. This was my dad. I thought I was the only one. Some messages were long, others were just 3 words. "Thank you, finally." One woman offered to donate books. Another asked if she could send a small monthly gift to help with utilities. A retired teacher from Idaho wrote to say she hadn't spoken to her sister in 8 years. But after reading my post, she might call her. Just once. I didn't respond to all of them. I didn't try to. It wasn't about managing an audience. It was about being part of something that didn't need a spotlight to be seen. Later that week, a care worker called. She'd heard about the hearth. Said she had a young woman, 19, just out of placement. Nowhere to go, no stable contact, quiet, withdrawn. I said yes before she finished the sentence. 2 days later, she arrived. She didn't say much. She carried everything she owned in a grocery store tote. Her sneakers were too big. Her coat was 2 sizes too small. I didn't ask questions. I showed her the room, the kitchen, the laundry setup, told her there was cereal in the cupboard, coffee on the counter, and tea in the drawer. She nodded once. Then again. That was enough. After she went to bed, I stood in the hallway looking at the frame I'd hung near the front door. The same one from Spokane. Still empty. I could have filled it 100 times by now, but I hadn't, because it didn't need to be. I brewed more tea, no champagne, just peace. The sun came up like it always does, casting a soft glow through the front windows of the hearth. The house was quiet, but not the kind of silence that comes from absence. This one was full, filled with the smell of oatmeal simmering in the kitchen, the soft padding of socks down the hallway, A rustle of pages from the living room, where one of the women had curled up with a book before breakfast. I moved through the space like I belonged there, not like someone proving a point, but someone keeping a promise. I brewed tea, poured a mug for myself, and left another on the counter in case someone wanted it later. Then I stepped onto the porch, watering the succulents lined up in mismatched pots. Most had been gifts. A few were rescues, like us. Inside, the two young women staying that month were already settling into their own quiet rituals. One had an online class at 9. The other was job hunting and liked to begin her mornings scrolling job boards in the breakfast nook, chewing a pencil like it owed her something. No one needed me to fix anything. That was the best part. Mid-morning, my phone vibrated with a message from an old classmate I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, you didn't hear this from me, but..." Attached was a screenshot of a local article from Spokane. After string of internal complaints and recent bad press, PR firm Beatrix Collective shutters quietly. Founder declines comment. Another screenshot followed. Velma's name. A church bulletin. With deep regret, we announce Velma Quinn's resignation from the Women's Leadership Board, effective immediately. No explanation, just lines between lines. Too much attention, maybe, or too many whispers. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen for a moment. There was no mention of me, no speculation, no sidebar quotes, no triumphant footnote. I preferred it that way. I didn't want a paragraph in someone else's article. I didn't need a headline. The truth had already done its job. Later that day, as I checked emails, I noticed a subject line that stopped me cold. From corinne.deadpersonalmail.com. Subject: I hope you're happy I didn't open it. I hovered my mouse for a second, then moved on to the next message. Some stories don't deserve a reply. Some stories already had too many rewrites. It was enough to know she had typed it, sent it, and sat with the silence on the other end. I didn't delete it. I just let it live where it belonged, in the unread. That evening, after dinner was cleaned up and the girls retreated to their corners of the house, I walked the hallway. The walls now held art from people who'd stayed. Watercolors, charcoal sketches, paper collages. Nothing had frames. That was on purpose. Except for one. At the end of the hall, near the door, hung the same frame I'd carried with me from Spokane. The one that used to hold family photos, then held nothing, then held the truth in its blankness. I dusted it gently. Still no picture. I didn't feel the need to fill it anymore. A new girl had arrived the week before. She was 16, sent from a group home, barely spoke. Yesterday, she asked about the frame. Who was supposed to be in there? I'd smiled and said, someone real. She'd nodded like she understood more than I'd expected. Tonight, I whispered the same answer aloud, this time to no one in particular. Then I turned off the lights, one by one, until the house was wrapped in quiet again. I made one last cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and exhaled. Not in celebration, not in regret. Just as a woman who had finally stopped running,